They say some stars are born, but nobody talks about what dies when a star is made from a child who never had a choice. Frances Ethel Gum came into this world in 1922 in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, but she would never really belong to herself. From the moment her mother Ethel heard her tiny voice, the little girl's fate was sealed by someone else's unfulfilled dreams. Ethel Gum had spent her youth reaching for spotlights that never found her, and when she looked at baby Frances, she saw her second chance wrapped in a blanket. Most mothers count their newborn's fingers and toes. Ethel was already counting future applause. Frank Gum, Frances's father, was a gentler soul who ran the local movie theater. He loved his youngest daughter with the quiet, protective love that fathers are supposed to give. But even his tenderness couldn't shield Frances from the momentum that Ethel was already building around their baby girl's future. By the time Frances could walk steadily, she was walking onto stages. The new Grand Theater became Frances's second home when she was barely 2 years old. While other toddlers were learning to play with toys and speak in sentences, Frances was learning that her value came from making strangers happy. She would toddle onto the stage between movie screenings, her tiny voice filling the space with songs that audiences found charming precisely because they came from someone so impossibly young. But what those audiences couldn't see was how quickly a child could learn to read the room, to adjust her energy based on the crowd's response, to understand that disappointing them meant disappointing the people she loved most. This wasn't presented as child labor, it was celebrated as precious talent. When Frances was 4, the Gum family made the decision that would change everything. They packed up their small-town life and moved to California, joining the thousands of families who migrated west, chasing Hollywood dreams. But unlike most of those families, the Gums actually found what they were looking for, though what they found would prove to be more complicated than anything they had imagined. Frances's voice had a quality that made talent scouts stop in their tracks. It carried emotional weight that seemed impossible for someone her age to possess. But this emotional maturity wasn't magic. It was the result of a child who had learned to access feelings that weren't naturally hers yet, to perform experiences she hadn't lived in service of entertaining people who would never know her real name. By the time Frances was 10, she was performing regularly on radio shows and in small venues around Los Angeles. The Gum sisters, Frances, and her older sisters Mary Jane and Dorothy Virginia, became a recognized act in the local entertainment scene. To outsiders, they seemed like a talented family living the American dream of success through hard work and natural ability. Behind the scenes, Frances was learning lessons that would shape the rest of her life in ways nobody intended or anticipated. She learned that her needs were less important than the schedule. She learned that being tired, hungry, or sad were problems to be managed rather than feelings to be acknowledged. She learned that the adults around her were happiest when she was performing, and that their happiness was more important than her own. The transformation from Frances Gum to Judy Garland began in 1934, when 12-year-old Frances was signed to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. This should have been the moment when dreams came true. A small-town girl with extraordinary talent was getting her shot at stardom. Newspapers wrote about her as if she had won the lottery of life. Her picture appeared in magazines, alongside stories about her wholesome family background and her natural, unspoiled charm. Nobody wrote about what it actually meant for a 12-year-old to be owned by one of the most powerful corporations in America. MGM didn't just hire Frances, they redesigned her completely. They changed her name because Frances Gum didn't sound like someone who belonged on movie posters. They changed her appearance, her mannerisms, her daily routine, and eventually, they would change her internal chemistry. At 12, she accepted these changes without question because she had already spent a decade learning that her preferences were less important than other people's business decisions. But what happened next revealed how far the studio system was willing to go to protect their investment. The MGM of the 1930s was built on absolute control. Every aspect of their stars' lives, from their public relationships to their private habits, was managed by the studio to ensure maximum profitability and minimum scandal. For adult performers, this level of control was intrusive and often oppressive. For a child, it was completely life-altering. Judy's education happened between takes, when the filming schedule allowed time for it. Her social development occurred under studio lights, surrounded by adults whose primary concern was her productivity. Her emotional needs were addressed only when they threatened to interfere with her work performance. When she turned 13, the studio introduced her to what they called vitamins, amphetamines to keep her energized during 18-hour filming days, and barbiturates to help her sleep when the work was finally done. The studio doctors who prescribed these medications presented them as necessary tools for maintaining her health under the demanding circumstances of her career. They never used words like addiction or dependency, because those terms didn't align with the studio's carefully constructed narrative about their young star's well-being and happiness. But a 13-year-old's developing brain doesn't distinguish between medical necessity and chemical manipulation. It simply adapts to whatever becomes routine. By the time Judy was 15, her natural sleep patterns, appetite, energy levels, and emotional responses had all been chemically altered in ways that seemed manageable in the short term, but would prove devastating over the course of her lifetime. This was the state she was in when she recorded Over the Rainbow for a movie that would make her famous around the world. The song was almost cut from The Wizard of Oz because studio executives worried it would slow down the film's pacing. They didn't understand that what they were hearing in Judy's voice wasn't just technical skill, it was genuine longing, expressed by someone who was beginning to understand that her own dreams would always come second to everyone else's plans for her. When audiences heard Dorothy sing about birds flying over the rainbow and wonder why she couldn't follow them, they were hearing Judy's real feelings about freedom, choice, and the possibility of a life that might belong to her instead of everyone else. But that authenticity also trapped her in ways that nobody could have predicted. America fell in love with Dorothy's innocence, hope, and trust. Studio executives made sure that Judy's public image never strayed too far from those qualities, even as her real experiences became increasingly distant from anything Dorothy would have recognized or understood. The gap between who she was expected to be in public and who she was becoming in private grew wider every year. When reporters interviewed her, studio representatives were always present to guide conversations away from topics that might disturb the illusion of perpetual youthful happiness that had become Judy's professional brand. She learned to give interviews that revealed nothing about her actual thoughts, feelings, or experiences. Behind the cameras, the medications were becoming central to her ability to function at all. Without amphetamines, she couldn't maintain the energy levels that her work schedule demanded. Without barbiturates, she couldn't sleep through the overstimulation and anxiety that constant performance created. Without appetite suppressants, she couldn't maintain the weight that cameras required. By 17, Judy's body had completely forgotten how to operate without pharmaceutical assistance, but this was never presented as a problem. When she occasionally questioned the routine or asked for modifications to her schedule, she was reminded of the larger picture that her cooperation made possible. The studio employed hundreds of people who depended on her films for their livelihoods. The theaters that showed her movies employed thousands more. The fans who bought tickets were counting on her to provide the entertainment they needed. Her family's financial security was built on her continued success and cooperation with studio requirements. The weight of all these dependencies meant that her personal struggles were always framed as secondary to her professional obligations. At 18, Judy found herself caught in an impossible contradiction. She was considered too old to play the innocent characters that had made her famous, but too young to be taken seriously as a dramatic actress, capable of more complex roles. This left her in a professional limbo where she was expected to maintain the enthusiasm and optimism of a child while handling responsibilities that would overwhelm most adults. The medications that had once helped her meet these impossible demands were now making them even more difficult to fulfill. Her weight fluctuated unpredictably, as her metabolism struggled to function normally after years of chemical manipulation. Her sleep remained erratic, making it difficult to maintain the consistency that film production required. Her emotional responses became less predictable, as the drugs that had once managed her feelings began losing their effectiveness. But what happened in 1941 would reveal the true extent of the damage that had been done to her basic relationship with her own body and mind. When Judy was 19, she experienced what the studio euphemistically called a nervous breakdown, though the official public story was that she had contracted the flu and needed rest. During her hospitalization, she attempted to stop taking the medications that had controlled her daily existence for 6 years. The withdrawal process was more devastating than anyone had anticipated. Her body had completely forgotten how to regulate sleep, energy, and appetite without pharmaceutical guidance. Her nervous system, which had been chemically managed since early adolescence, struggled to function independently. Her emotions, which had been numbed and controlled for so long, came flooding back without any natural coping mechanisms to contain or process them. The studio doctors convinced her that resuming the medication routine was essential for her physical and mental health. This was the moment when Judy began to understand that she wasn't just contractually bound to MGM, she was physiologically dependent on them in ways that made any form of independence seem impossible. The medications weren't just managing her career performance anymore. They were managing her basic ability to exist in the world. When she returned to work, something fundamental had changed in her relationship with performing, though it would take years for the full implications to become clear. The spontaneous joy and natural timing that had made her early performances so magical now required conscious effort to access and maintain. The instinctive emotional connection that had made her voice so compelling was replaced by a more calculated, deliberate approach. She was still extraordinarily talented, but the source of that talent had been fundamentally altered. Her personal relationships began to suffer as the line between her public persona and private self became increasingly blurred and difficult to navigate. She married David Rose in 1941, hoping that marriage might provide some stability and normalcy in her otherwise chaotic existence. But the relationship lasted only 2 years, ending when the demands of her career made normal domestic rhythms impossible to establish or maintain. Her schedule was determined by studio executives who had no reason to consider her husband's needs or her own desires for a relationship that extended beyond the boundaries of her professional life. During this period, she began to understand that fame hadn't expanded her life choices. It had systematically eliminated most of them. The constant need to maintain her public image meant that she couldn't express frustration, exhaustion, or unhappiness without risking her career. The studio's massive financial investment in her success meant that her personal struggles would always be treated as secondary to their business concerns. The public's emotional investment in her wholesome image meant that any signs of real human complexity had to be carefully hidden from view. By her mid-20s, Judy had been performing professionally for over 20 years. She had never held a regular job, never lived independently, never made a significant life decision without first considering how it would affect her career. She had never developed the practical life skills that most people acquire gradually during their teenage years and early adulthood. But instead of being destroyed by these circumstances, something unexpected began to happen. Judy started to transform her accumulated pain into a source of artistic power that was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Her performances in the late 1940s and early 1950s contained an emotional depth and authenticity that couldn't be taught, manufactured, or replicated by other performers. She had learned to access real human suffering and convert it into something that could touch other people's hearts in profound and lasting ways. A Star is Born in 1954 showcased this evolved artistry in a way that shocked audiences who had only known her as the girl who sang about rainbows. Her performance as Vicky Lester was raw, honest, and heartbreaking in ways that her earlier work had never approached. For the first time, she was playing a character whose struggles resembled her own, and the authenticity of her portrayal was both magnificent and terrifying to witness. The film was a critical triumph, but it also made visible the tremendous cost that her years of controlled living had exacted on her physical and emotional well-being. Her marriage to Vincente Minnelli had ended in divorce. Despite producing a daughter, Liza, who would inherit both her mother's extraordinary talent and some of her complicated relationship with the entertainment industry, Judy's ongoing battle with the studio system had become increasingly adversarial as she fought for creative control and basic human autonomy. The medications that had once helped her meet impossible professional demands were now making those demands even more difficult to fulfill consistently. In 1950, MGM released her from her contract after 18 years of service. The official statement described it as a mutual decision that would allow her to pursue more diverse artistic opportunities. The reality was that she had become too unpredictable and complicated for a system that valued efficiency and control above all other considerations. For the first time since she was 12 years old, Judy was unemployed and uncertain about her professional future. This period of rejection and uncertainty coincided with a personal crisis that would define the remaining years of her life. Without the structure that the studio system had provided, she struggled to create healthy routines and boundaries for herself, the basic life skills that most adults develop naturally. Financial management, relationship building, emotional regulation, self-care had never been part of her education or experience. She began performing in nightclubs and concert halls, rediscovering the immediate, intimate connection with live audiences that had been lost during her years of film work. These performances revealed something that the controlled environment of movie sets had obscured. Judy had evolved into an artist capable of channeling universal human experiences through her voice and presence in ways that transcended ordinary entertainment. Audiences didn't just admire her technical skill anymore. They felt understood, validated, and less alone in their own struggles and disappointments. But this newfound artistic freedom came with challenges that she wasn't equipped to handle independently. Without studio doctors managing her medication, she began to self-medicate in ways that were even more dangerous than the controlled regimen she had lived with for so many years. Without studio schedules structuring her days, she struggled with the basic rhythms of eating, sleeping, and working that most people establish naturally during childhood and adolescence. Her relationships became increasingly complicated as she tried to find people who could understand and support her without either exploiting her vulnerability or attempting to fix problems that were too deep and complex for simple solutions. She married Sidney Luft in 1952, and their relationship was passionate but turbulent. He understood the entertainment business and genuinely cared about her well-being, but he couldn't protect her from internal struggles that had been developing for decades. They had 2 children together, Lorna and Joey, but Judy's unpredictable health and emotional state made consistent, stable parenting extremely difficult. The woman who had spent her entire life taking care of other people's emotional and financial needs had never learned how to take care of her own basic requirements for physical and mental health. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Judy's live performances became legendary for their emotional intensity and complete unpredictability. Some nights, she delivered concerts that audiences would remember for the rest of their lives, where her presence on stage created a sense of communion between artist and audience that transcended typical entertainment boundaries. Other nights, she struggled to complete her performances, overwhelmed by exhaustion, medication effects, or emotional states that she couldn't control or predict with any reliability. But even on her most difficult nights, something extraordinary continued to happen between Judy and the people who came to hear her sing. Audiences who attended her concerts during this period often described feeling like they were witnessing something sacred, not just a performance, but a form of testimony about what it meant to survive experiences that couldn't be easily categorized, explained, or resolved. Her willingness to be vulnerable in front of strangers gave other people permission to acknowledge their own wounds, disappointments, and ongoing struggles. This connection with audiences became both her greatest source of meaning and her deepest emotional burden. She understood that people came to her concerts carrying their own heartaches, looking for someone who could validate their experiences of loss, longing, and the gap between what life had promised and what it had actually delivered. She felt a profound responsibility to honor that trust, even when doing so required her to access parts of herself that were already damaged by years of being accessed without adequate protection or recovery time. Her 1961 concert at Carnegie Hall was recorded and became one of the most celebrated live albums in music history. But the performance also demonstrated the enormous physical and emotional energy it required for her to give audiences what they needed from her. By the mid-1960s, the cumulative cost of this level of emotional availability was becoming impossible to sustain. Her health problems were mounting as the long-term effects of prescription drug use compounded with the ongoing stress of financial difficulties, legal battles, and the practical challenges of maintaining relationships under constant public scrutiny. Her marriage to Sidney Luft had ended in another painful divorce, and subsequent attempts at romantic relationships struggled under the weight of her fame, her health issues, and the basic difficulty of building intimacy with someone whose entire existence had been shaped by performing for others. She moved to London in the late 1960s, hoping that geographical distance from Hollywood might provide the space she needed to rebuild her life on more manageable and sustainable terms. But the patterns that had been established during her childhood and adolescence proved extraordinarily resistant to change. Even with professional independence and physical distance from the studio system that had shaped her, the habit of prioritizing other people's needs over her own, the tendency to use work as a way of avoiding personal problems, the reliance on chemical solutions for emotional and physical challenges, these had become so fundamental to her way of existing that changing them felt like losing herself entirely. Her final performances in London were attended by audiences who understood they might be witnessing the end of something that could never be replaced or replicated. She died in 1969, at the age of 47, in her London apartment. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental overdose of barbiturates, but the actual cause was much more complex than any medical examiner could capture in an official report. Judy Garland died from a lifetime of being valued more for what she could provide to others than for who she was as a complete human being. The little girl who had learned at age 2 that her worth was measured by her ability to make strangers happy had grown into a woman who couldn't imagine existing without external validation, even when the cost of earning that validation had become more than her body and spirit could continue to bear. But what prevents her story from being simply a cautionary tale about the entertainment industry is the extraordinary artistic legacy that emerged from her experiences. Her greatest performances contained a quality that cannot be replicated, taught, or manufactured. Absolute honesty about the complexity and difficulty of human existence. She sang about hope and heartbreak with equal conviction because she had experienced both completely. Her audiences trusted her because she never pretended that life was simpler or easier than their own experiences had taught them it actually was. The child who never got the chance to develop naturally became an adult who could speak to the parts of other people that had also been denied adequate protection, nurturing, and time to grow. When she sang Over the Rainbow in her later concerts, the song carried meanings that were completely different from what it had represented when she was 16. The longing in her voice was no longer theoretical or performed. It was earned, real, and impossible to dismiss or ignore. The world that had initially fallen in love with Dorothy's innocence eventually discovered that Judy's hard-won wisdom was actually more valuable and meaningful than any fictional character she could portray. Her legacy extends far beyond the movies and recordings she left behind. She gave countless people permission to be complicated, wounded, and still deserving of love and respect. She proved that perfection isn't necessary for greatness, and that sometimes the most important and beautiful art emerges from the places that hurt the most. The rainbow she sang about was never meant to be a destination she could actually reach, but rather a symbol of the eternal human longing for something better than what we're given. Maybe the real tragedy isn't that Judy Garland died young, but that she lived so long without anyone asking what she needed to not just survive, but truly thrive. The world celebrated her resilience and strength, but nobody thought to question why a child had needed to develop that kind of strength in the first place.